This was back in June of 2016. My mom and dad had taken a trip out west. They had entered Muir Woods and were not very far in, no more than half a mile. Of course, they're both admiring the huge trees, taking it all in, snapping photos and basking in the general magnificence of the towering woods. So my mom says that both she and my dad are standing in front of this one huge tree. There are tourists bopping around close by, feet away. As she's looking, she notices this movement coming from the bark. I ask her how high up, and she says it was at approximately eye level, so 4.5 to 5 feet. My mom is short, 5 foot nothing. She said all of this happened in the span of about 5 seconds. Movement in the bark directly in front of her, and then she sees it take the shape of a face. First the brows, then a nose, eyes, lips, and chin. She says the face is protruding out of the trunk. I ask how big this face is, and she says almost a foot tall from chin to forehead. As the face is continuing to bulge, she lets out a small, involuntary gasp. And just like that, as if the face realized it was being noticed, it shrunk back into the bark, and the tree returned to normal. Not looking away from the tree, my mom says, "Kelly, did you see?" And my father completes her sentence with, "The face in the tree, yes." Not a question, it was a statement. Another woman who was a couple of feet away stepped up to where my parents were standing and said, "I saw it too," and then moved away. Now, either the majority of the group was already moving out, or my father just began walking away on his own accord, but they both leave the tree. Mom said she started asking my dad about what he saw to see if it matched what she did. He said he wasn't comfortable discussing it right then and told her to hush, that if people heard them they would think they were crazy. So they leave it alone. But later during the trip he still doesn't want to discuss it. Now, even though my dad has had his fair share of wild experiences, and he will usually humor bizarre conversation, he's handled this whole situation like a total Hank Hill. Maybe since he can't fully understand it, he rebukes it. I don't know. He's always been particularly sensitive on the topic of the paranormal. He almost rejects it, but I know he believes in it enough that he's afraid of giving it power by acknowledging it. Like he knows giving it a thought is the same thing as giving it energy and room to grow. I feel like I know this because I bought my mom dowsing rods once. She didn't think I could find them. This was 10 years ago when she didn't understand the vastness of Amazon's shopping capabilities. I took it as both a challenge and a Christmas gag gift. My dad went into town and the rest of the family started playing with the rods, asking it questions. My dad walked in the door, saw the rods, and said, "I don't want those in this house." He was pissed. He equated them to a Ouija board, which was absolutely off limits in our house. To this day, my mom has so many questions. What did she see in that tree? What would it have done if it hadn't been seen? Was it an entity from another plane? Has this phenomenon ever been mentioned in Muir Woods? I don't know, but it certainly was an interesting experience to hear about. I wanted to share an experience that still freaks me out just thinking about it. Just down the road from where I used to live a few years ago in Southeast Australia is the opening into about 100 acres of woodland and bush. I frequently went in there when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at about 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and as we were in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we were there. She loves everything to do with nature, and it was summer, so it was extremely warm. I left my car with the lights shining into the trees as we weren't going in too far, and it was pitch black inside. The two of us just sat, having a smoke, chatting, and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been put in some plastic, and I was keeping an eye on the trees as I had a feeling that something was just wrong. I've read stories before about people who felt like they were in danger, even though nothing around them was perceptibly off. And this was that same feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out, and my adrenaline was up, but there wasn't really anything in my eye line that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realized that it looked different from before. It was only after staring into the darkness that I saw that there was moonlight, which was now lighting up grass. Before, it couldn't reach the grass, and it dawned on me that that was because there was a black shape blocking it. I assumed it was a tree. The only way that I can describe it was that all sound just ceased, and everything went dead silent. A few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path as this thing crawled toward us on all fours. I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the United States or Europe. But somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, just slowly crawling toward us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as I couldn't look away, but just as it reached the line that my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto two legs and just sat, staring at us. I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another meter taller than me, with arms that were far too long, that reached down near the ground. All I could make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur on it, and in the dim light could make out the silhouette of its head as being that of a dog or a wolf. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break me out of whatever was stopping me from thinking logically. I grabbed her by the arm and we sprinted to the car, slammed the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could. Both of us were too scared to speak until about a half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I imagine a rabbit sees when it catches a wolf or a fox looking at it, that this is something that would be able to end us with absolute ease if it chose to. Neither of us have ever been able to come up with any explanation for what it was, but it has definitely changed the way I view the woods and bush when I go camping or hiking now. Every time I go out, I think back to that day, and I wonder what it was, and if I'll ever see it again. I'm a 23-year-old boy whose family moved during the Yugoslavian War in 1999 from eastern Serbia to Switzerland. We used to live in a small village across the Danube at the Bulgarian and Romanian border, a region that has a very colorful history. Many bloody historic events occurred on the soil where we lived. Roman emperors used to rule this area, as well as many historical figures such as Attila the Hun, Alexander the Great, Vlad the Impaler, and others. They were all once residing here and fighting battles. The region has been occupied many times. The longest used to be under the Ottomans. This occupation lasted for almost 3 centuries. After the Ottoman occupation, the country didn't have much time to recover, and the First and Second World Wars had struck the country already. Many people died during the First World War, about a third of the population. As a result, guerrilla groups were formed, killing even more people. In conclusion, many people were unjustifiably tortured and lost their lives, which is probably why there are many occurrences of the paranormal here. Magic is also very common here. The so-called black magic, or Vlaska magia, involation, is said to be one of the strongest in the world, and many people tend to practice it and religiously believe in it. As a result, there are many stories about paranormal events. One of my favorites was a story my grandfather told me. He grew up in the forest, in a small and old house that was about 300 years old. He was adopted by my great-grandfather, He used to be a leader in one of the upcoming resistance movements against the socialist regime after the Second World War. He fought in both world wars, and even with all this, he took great care of my grandfather and loved him as if it was his own child. 50 years passed since he left his home, and all of those people living here died. But my grandpa still visits the house and stays overnight here. This place creeps me out. Even during the day, there's an aura to this place that just makes it uncomfortable to be here. I can't imagine staying here overnight, but he frequently does, and one day he told me a very weird story. While he stays there, he gets visited often. At first, I thought visits like the one you get from neighbors or something. But he told me that one night he woke up to a hand crawling on his head. It was a huge, white, pale man kneeling next to him, using his hand to just crawl across his head, speaking with a calm voice in Vlaski, the dying language that we used to speak here, a mix of Moldavian and Romanian. He told me that his skin was white and that it was glowing in the night. He didn't have any hair, and the hand felt very soft. My grandfather always respected the dead and was never really afraid. He told me that he didn't really speak to him and just enjoyed his company, since he knew in some way that he wasn't evil. Another time he told me that he used to fix small parts around his house. When it started to get dark, he slowly began getting ready to leave with his tractor because it takes about an hour to reach the next civilized place. While putting stuff back into the barn, he heard loud noises in the attic. It didn't bother him until a plank was thrown down the stairs. He recalled one time they even threw down a rock into the wheelbarrow that he was pushing into the barn. He told me he just turned around, locked the barn, and didn't so much as frown. They expect you to react. Do not give them this pleasure, is what he told me while laughing. Makes him go crazy. Growing up, I heard a lot of these stories, and it really runs in our family, experiencing from time to time such encounters. The scariest thing that happened to me occurred during the summer of 2009. My grandfather told me during this summer break, as usual stories from the past, how he used to walk these woods alone in the dark, and what he experienced while doing so. Since I was in my teen years, I started to question the reliability of his stories. From time to time, I took out my old motorcycle and drove out into the forest. Driving around was the only time I could really think about things, you know? To be in this type of state that you don't have to question everything and think about the world. So one day I took out my bike and decided to drive around. I still don't know why or how, but somehow I find myself driving to the old house he grew up in. I didn't really bother to question why my intention was to drive there, so I just kept going. I always believed that I was a kid, pure by heart, and no evil could come to me. While I was driving out, I thought about the probabilities of actually encountering a vampire. I live, as mentioned, in East Serbia, where vampires are very widely believed in. My grandpa always told me not to go out past dusk, but I didn't really care, so I still kept going. Remembering back, I thought that his intention was to keep me scared, so I didn't get lost in the woods. But being a teenager at the time, I thought that I was invincible. In fact, even a vampire wouldn't cross my path, that I would ease past with them to no harm. There aren't really any streets there. It's just a dirt road between trees that leads to pretty much nothing. After an hour, even the dirt road starts to vanish. While I was driving and thinking about how strong I was, I noticed that my hand felt very wet. I thought it was because I was sweating, since this region can get very hot. After taking a look at my hand, I saw that there was blood all over it. I thought maybe it was a bug, that I had squished it, but it was just too much blood. So I started to look at my hand for wounds. But my hand seemed to be perfectly fine. My heart slowly started racing, and I took a sharp turn and drove back home. I remember this to be the moment that I was the most scared in my entire life. I had the urge to look behind me every second that I was driving through the forest. It seemed like somebody was sitting behind me, just waiting for me to fall down or make a mistake. After arriving home and telling my grandpa, he just started laughing and told me never to question their abilities again. I have a ton of stories regarding these kinds of events. Also, we have a few witches in our family that used to practice black magic. It was taught to them by their ancestors. I've never told this story to anyone before, simply due to not having any answers and thinking that there's nothing that can be gained from telling it. But eventually I figured, why not? Maybe somebody knows what I saw. Many, many years ago, at Wangi Campgrounds in Queensland, Australia, my father, my friend and I were out camping for a couple of days. Usually it's packed, but we went during the week and got 2 days off school. I can't remember the reason. I think it was just because my dad had a few days off, but that's beside the point. Due to it being midweek, the grounds were empty. We've been here many, many times before, but never alone. However, we were excited due to having the whole grounds to ourselves. Cool, right? Now, we're no strangers to the Australian bush. We know what to look out for. We know how to play it safe. So at night, knowing that nobody was around to mess with our camp, we decided to go for a mini bushwalk to the other side of the river that runs along the grounds. When I say grounds, it's just a clearing in the middle of a bush, not a properly established grounds, and it's far away from all the roads. We got to the opposite riverside, and looking out to the river, we could see a bright light just near our campgrounds. Thinking it could have been the fire, we put it out, but they could easily relight, we walked back through the bush to our site, still able to see the large light. However, when we got to our side, we realized that it wasn't the fire. As we were able to be closer to the river this time, we saw that the light was over the river, not in it, but over it. We were somewhat scared, but thought that there had to be some explanation for it. Maybe a flashlight or a torch, something along those lines. But looking from where we were, there was nothing under it. The light was a good 70-ish centimeters above the water. And still. Dead still. The light itself was flickering, sort of like a fire, but it was in no way attached to anything. It was just a large ball, like between a tennis ball and a soccer ball, floating and giving off a strong fire-like light, but more like a light bulb center. This went on for maybe 30 minutes as we tried splashing the water and trying to figure out what it was, but it didn't move. It didn't do anything. It just floated at that one spot, in complete silence, unlike the sound a fire would make. My dad decided to go get the torch and his camera, and of course, being the scared 12-year-olds we were, we went with him. As soon as we got to the campsite, which was maybe only 100 meters away, the light was gone. We ran back with the torch, but there was nothing there, and no one there. No other campers. It was just gone. We didn't really talk about it because we didn't know what it was, or how it was there, or why it was there. Nin Nin lights are something that are very popular in the Australian outback, and that's the only explanation that I've got for it. But they have no explanation, so it's a dead end. So, back in Halloween of the early 2000s, my friends and I were trick-or-treating, as we were only in our freshman or sophomore years of high school. We had taken a walk to a wealthier neighborhood in the hopes that they would have better candy than ours did, and we were supposed to cut through a slightly wooded area into a friend's backyard. My friend Will was leading us through, and he didn't really know the shortcut back. So we ended up in a very small clearing, just barely still visible from the street. We could still see the street though, so we didn't end up getting lost. The point, though, is the house that we found. It was slightly old and definitely abandoned, with all of the overgrowth covering it, making it hard to see from the street. We wanted to check it out, as it was Halloween, and we figured we should get a little spooked. We did get spooked too, when we peeked through the back screen door, and saw a little bit of movement in the pitch-black house. But we were already slightly creeped out, so we decided to walk back and take the right shortcut. As we went back, we saw a little bit of movement behind us, and all of us booked it home, being as excitable as we already were. This all happened 5 months before the actual point of the story occurred. By this time, we had explored the house, sealing off the first floor with a door, shower curtain, and weights, as there was some kind of substance in the air that would always make us feel unwell. We made a setup out of the upper floor of the house that we could relax in. We were using it as a spot to hang out, having filled it with battery lamps and chairs, as well as sleeping bags, for when we would have get-togethers away from our parents for a long time. But as cozy as we made it, the things that we found in the house creeped us out endlessly. The ones I remember the most were the 2 closets, one with a hook and a rope on the ceiling, and possibly dried blood on the ground. The other closet was filled with plastic on the walls and what we think was also blood. New cleaning supplies were still under the kitchen sink, even though the faucet was removed as well as the oven. There was a functional cotton gin sitting in the empty garage, and a grime-covered knife sitting in the sink. We ignored most of these things, and simply sealed off more rooms that creeped us out. But when we found that knife in the sink, I was worried somebody could use it to attack one of us if they somehow ended up squatting in the hideout we made. So I got the genius idea of going to the absolutely filthy brown and black fluid leaking out of the walls bathroom that no one would ever think to go in, and throw the knife in the toilet, which was filled with the same grime and sludge. But when I went in, I failed to notice the door, for some reason, ever so gently closing behind me. And as I was looking around the bathroom for a place to hide the knife, the room got thick and cold, except for a slight warmth on my left shoulder, and I was paralyzed. That moment started to feel like hours. Then, ever so quietly and weakly and tiredly, I heard a noise in my left ear, like something that's a cross between a whimper and a dry-throated croak. It seemed filled with more sadness and panic and pleading than I've ever felt in my entire life. I quickly ran out, tossing the knife behind me, and slammed the door shut as hard as I could, feeling a force pull back against me. Then I ran out to my friends who were just outside by the door. We sealed that room up too, and we only went back to clean out our things. We called the police anonymously and the house was searched, and a few months later it was demolished. I'd like to say that although the police searched and apparently found nothing, I concretely believe that a woman, or maybe some poor girl, died in that house. I hope she isn't angry with me. The scariest story I have is about a night deep in the Oregon woods. I'll preface this by giving my background, not as a brag or anything, just to show that my outdoor and survival bona fides are there. I'm 37, and I've literally spent over 5 total years alone in the woods, camping and hiking. I've gone months without ever talking to another human being. I've taken every class or training you can imagine in identifying animals, especially threatening ones that can kill me. I have walked most of the Appalachian Trail barefoot. I have spent 3 weeks in varying wilderness areas across the US and Canada. I know what a mountain lion sounds like, whether it's mating, scared, communicating, or whatever. I know what foxes, bobcats, owls, and varying birds, moose, elk, deer, weasels, bison, bugs, everything in between sounds like. When you have a hobby like I do, and you spend every free second alone in the woods, You have to know sounds. It's absolutely imperative to know if something is close by that wants to eat you. Again, I only say all this because it's inevitable. Every time I tell one of my stories, at least one person is gonna say, "Nah, dude, it's just a fox. They scream bloody murder." Yeah, I know. I've had 3 or 4 sounds that scared me that don't match any animal living in North America. There was only one that made me leave camp early and go back to civilization. This time, I was actually doing a buddy camp with my oldest friend. He's the same age and has more experience in the woods than I do. We met up in Oregon for a 2-week camp in the vicinity of Mount Hood National Park. We were well off the beaten path, no people or civilization anywhere near us. One night, late at our camp setup, he and I were sitting by a fire, just bullshitting and reminiscing. It's also important to note that we were sober. I occasionally drink and occasionally smoke, but never on these trips. Your sobriety and level-headedness can be the difference between life and death out there. As we talked, from maybe 300 yards away or so, down in a ravine, we heard a howl, growl, scream sound that persisted for several minutes. It literally vibrated in our heads. That's how powerful it was. It was guttural and booming. The only way I've ever been able to describe it is if you imagine a huge horror movie with a limitless budget. Imagine some huge, powerful demon. Now imagine in that movie the demon is somehow defeated and sent back to hell, and the screams of agony and anger as it's dragged back to where it came from. That's what it sounded like. It was terrible. 2 grown men with decades of experience, both of us carrying firearms for protection. Firearms that, if need be, could take down a 1,000-pound bear, were in hysteric tears, clinging to each other like a Scooby-Doo movie, frantically deciding what to do. We made it until the first signs of day and booked our asses back to our checkpoint and got the hell out of not just the area but Oregon completely. I'm now just getting to the point that I can talk about it. I've never gone out there to monster hunt. It's always been about my love of nature, animals, and solitude. Over the last few months, I've become enthralled with unknown sounds because of my own experience. I've never gone out with any technology except a mobile GPS and an emergency satellite phone. My next trip is in May. I have recently invested in solid recording equipment, an FLIR camera, and solid digital video recorder. On this next trip, I'm going to actively devote time to try to record the things that I've heard. My husband and I really enjoy outdoor sports, especially camping. We sometimes go camping in forbidden zones too, but we really do take care of the place we're staying, always cleaning up our mess and trying to leave it the way we found it. This happened during one of the times we were camping in a forbidden zone. We now call it the Fairy Forest. The forest is owned by a family that did a hell of a good job at decorating the place. Figures of fairies, elves, and angels were scattered around the brown fall leaves on branches and rocks. Dream catchers and other handmade artifacts, presumably made by children, were also hanging around the place. There were also little tables and chairs designed for the fairies, and info tables explaining about the fairies and elves. It was truly a fairy tale. There was one problem though. Some douchebags threw things and broke some of the decorations. So we put them back up and mended what we could, and then we walked along. We set up our tent, cooked some food, enjoyed our drinks, and just chilled before going to bed. I woke up to 3 or 4 lights hovering over me at night. I wasn't scared, I was just surprised. I didn't want to open my eyes in case the lights disappeared. I wanted to prolong the experience as much as I could, but I soon drifted back to sleep. The morning sun penetrating our tent woke us up. As we were pouring our morning coffee, I casually told my husband that I saw lights hovering over us at night. He paused for a second and then said, "I saw them too." We got into a heated discussion as to what they could have been. No, our overhead lamp could not have malfunctioned, because the lights were moving, almost swimming in the air, if you will. No, they could not have been people shining flashlights at us, because we didn't hear any footsteps, and the source of the lights were coming directly from our tent right above us. They were like balls of light or orbs, not like rays. No, they couldn't have been airplane lights or any other street lights, because again, the lights that we saw were moving. We believe that they were fairies, possibly thanking us for cleaning up the mess. We still go there from time to time, just to drink coffee, but we haven't camped there since. I always sense this amazing feeling each time I go there. That forest melts away my problems and gives me a content feeling, almost like it's telling me that everything's going to be okay. And it's absolutely beautiful. I'm not sure what the hell I saw on this day. I'm pretty sure this incident can be debunked, but I would need to go back and investigate for more of a definite answer. In March of 2018, my friends and I needed to shoot for a music video project for film class. I was running about an hour late because I was involved with a community play. When I came to the park, they told me that some weird kids were following them around when they started filming. We were filming ourselves smashing fruit, because why not? They had to be at least 1 year or 2 years older than us. I don't remember if I ever saw them in person, but they were able to get in the background of some of our footage. I remember them looking like hicks as we were filming in the mountains. There was obviously something off about them. We then continued filming. 2 hours passed and the sun was setting. We had just wrapped filming for the day and were headed back to the pavilion. The park is set up where there is a pavilion near the playground. Near this playground and pavilion, there's a walking trail that goes through a wooded area, which takes up about an acre. You come out near a few soccer fields and loop around back to the parking lot, which is also near the pavilion and playground. We were primarily left alone in the park after those kids left, with occasional people popping up every now and then. An old lady was walking her dog near the pavilion, and my friends decided to talk to her. I was putting our equipment away when I saw a girl off the walking path in the wooded area. She was wearing a modern-day white winter jacket, Ugg boots, and a white winter hat and black pants. She had brown or black hair. She looked about my age. I was wondering if it was somebody I went to school with, so I tried to see her face, but she wouldn't turn around. I forgot if she was walking a dog or if she was just standing there by herself. She was off the path and didn't seem to be going in a straight direction. Rather, she was walking around slowly, in a circle. All of a sudden, she slowly goes behind a tree and doesn't come out the other side. At this point, my friends were done talking to the old lady and they were leaving. They left before me as they lived closer to the park than I did. After they left, I investigated and didn't see the girl. I brought this up with my friends later, and they said that besides the kids mentioned earlier, they hadn't noticed anybody. A few months later, I went back to investigate more. There was a white bench in the area where I had seen the girl. Depending on where you sat at the pavilion depended on how much of the bench you could see. It was also very cold out when I was at the park the time I saw the girl. It was one of the hotter days of the month, but when the sun sets, it's nearly freezing temperatures. I was wearing a short-sleeved shirt since it was supposed to be hotter than usual out. The cold could have made me hallucinate, I guess, as I'm pretty sure I could have gotten frostbite if I stayed out there another half hour. The girl also could have just walked out from behind the tree when I wasn't paying attention. I also found an entrance to a bunker or something in the wooded area. It didn't look like a regular electrical or sewer entrance either, as it was painted blue and had some sort of message on it. I don't remember what it said, but it was definitely not related to the sewer or electricity. Maybe the bunker is haunted. The only thing creepy I could find out about the park is that a vigil was held there for a girl who was hit by a car in a nearby town a few years prior to filming. I didn't get any footage of her, unfortunately, but not the type of person to make these kinds of stories up. I am planning on going back to this park to see if I can debunk this once and for all. I went to Moonville when I was in college in Nelsonville. We decided at around 10 p.m., let's go search for this supposedly haunted tunnel. We arrived at about 10:45 p.m. Unaware of the parking lot and the bridge that led right to it, we parked a few miles down the road from it, on an old railroad track that's now a path. Our friend promised that he knew the way from there. We followed the walking path that just stops at a very steep embankment, almost 90 degrees. We all climb down and then come to Raccoon Creek and cross a shallow part. We wander around for a bit, roughly until midnight, trying to find this tunnel and anything particularly paranormal or out of the ordinary. All of a sudden, we're in this canyon type thing, and everything in the middle of it is dead. Trees, birds, insects, nothing was living, and there were animal corpses that covered the canyon floor. One end of the cliff was about 35 feet down, so I'm not sure what was there. When we found our way out of the canyon, it was like we had just exited a completely different world. Everything was living again, and you could hear birds. Thinking to ourselves that we thought we had only spent about 30 minutes in there, we checked our phones. Our phones were doubling as our flashlights, and all of them were almost dead. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Knowing that this was the witching hour, we all started to freak out a bit, and knowing that there were cults and sacrificial rituals that were performed in those woods often, we wanted to get out of there. We didn't know where we were, and we were trying to use our maps on our phones, but we didn't have any service, so that wasn't a lot of help. And then our phones started to die, one by one, until we got to the last bit of battery on the last phone. That was when we found the one-lane gravel road, and instantly were able to run out and find our vehicles and get the hell out of there. Since then, I've only been back once, and it was in the daytime, after finding out about the bridge to it. Definitely one of the creepier experiences I've ever had, and I haven't ventured back to that spot from the first night, and I don't plan to again. Another interesting note is that it's said that a goat man lives on top of the tunnel, although I've never had any encounter to prove this, but I thought maybe it was worth a mention. My stepdad and I are pretty cool. He's been in the family for about 2 years now, and he's told me a few stories that I'll always remember. This is one of them. He's a hunter, and he's always hunted with his family and friends from church. One weekend, he and some guys from church were hunting rabbits using dogs. While they were in the woods, they passed an abandoned barn, probably because there was a farm not far away. They kept going through some thick brush until it opened up to a less thick forest. In the trees there were what seemed to be squirrel nests, but these were different. They were big enough for a person to lie down in. When they got here, the hunting dogs started barking and ran to the trees that held the nests, as if there was some kind of animal up there. My stepdad and the other men grabbed the dogs and kept walking, because they figured it was just raccoons, and they were only after rabbits. They kept combing the woods, and the dogs jumped one rabbit, which one of the men shot. After he shot it, however, one of the shells failed to eject, so he went back to the truck to fix the gun. As the rest were hunting, they heard a shot coming from the direction of the truck. They walked back, thinking that he had shot another rabbit. When they started on their way back to the truck, they met the man walking through the woods to meet them. He told them that he had fixed his gun and sat down to eat some crackers that he had bought at a gas station before the hunt. As he was eating, the shotgun went off, even though it was just a couple of feet away, laying on the bed of the truck. He also added that he clearly remembered the gun being on safety. After that incident, they quit the hunt. Before they left, one man brought up that he felt weird the whole time they were hunting, as if somebody was watching them. The others said that they felt the same way, especially after they encountered the nests in the trees. My stepdad told me about where it was they were hunting, and I've been by there before. What I can see from the road is thick, thick forest that's almost in the middle of nowhere, with that one farm and a cotton field. It makes me scared to go hunting by myself. I haven't really had a ton of encounters that I can't explain, but one kind of sticks with me from about a year ago. Last December, I was visiting my family who lives in Poland for the holidays, just some traditional stuff. A couple of days before Christmas, I decided to take a walk in the forest that I used to play in when I was little. There wasn't much going on for the rest of that particular day. It was in the late afternoon, and it was pretty foggy, with overcast skies. The temperature was around 5 degrees Celsius. When I entered the forest, it was normal. I could hear birds chirping and other small animals moving around. About 15 minutes later, it suddenly got really cold. The forest went quiet, and I could see my own breath. I was confused, so I checked the weather app on my phone to see if the temperatures matched up. But my phone said it was still 5 degrees, which didn't make any sense, because I could see my breath and my teeth were chattering. Then, when I turned my phone off, I saw my reflection in the screen, but standing behind me was a white figure. I didn't get a great look before I jumped and quickly turned around to find nothing behind me. It scared the shit out of me, so I started running back the way I came. As I ran, I looked back to see the figure calmly walking toward me. Only then did I get a good look at her. It looked like a girl, probably in her late teens or early 20s. She had mid-length curly dark hair and wore a dress that looked like it was from the early 1900s era. It didn't look like she had any eyes, just dark holes where the eyes should have been. This scared me even more, so I picked up my pace and ran full speed out of the woods and back to my uncle's house. As I exited the forest, I felt the temperature gradually return to normal. When I entered the house, I was out of breath. None of my family members were home except for my aunt, who was in the other room watching television. I never told them, or anyone, about what happened. I've tried finding a logical explanation for it all, but I just can't. I was always skeptical about ghosts, but I am a superstitious person, especially when it comes to demons or folklore. If anyone knows more about the paranormal than I do, and you know what the hell that thing was, please let me know.